Our Story Production presents The Road to Our Story, spotlighting an in-depth look at many of The Road to Our Story magazine's featured articles. So get ready, for you're about to travel on The Road to Our Story.
Hello, I'm Jason Howland, and welcome to Speaking of Health, a place to help you learn how to live a longer and healthier life. You know, it's the part of the body that probably gets the most use and abuse on a daily basis. Whether you're standing, walking, or running, your feet are bearing the brunt of your body every day. And there are ways to keep your feet healthier and happier. And here to tell us more is Dr. Jeremy Fleischman. He is a podiatric foot and ankle surgeon from Mayo Clinic Health System. Dr. Fleischman, thanks for joining us today on Speaking of Health.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, today we are talking about healthy, happy feet. Let's start out with the basics. First of all, as a podiatric foot and ankle surgeon, the feet are your specialty, correct?
Correct. As a podiatric foot and ankle surgeon, I went to school specifically in dealing with pathology of the foot and the ankle. I did a very intensive residency program that dealt with elective reconstruction, diabetic limb salvage, and trauma. I've had problems with, I'm sure you have, and maybe many of the people in TV land out there have had problems with their feet. Normally it's the last thing from your mind, but when you've got aches and pains, you're dealing with it every day, every step, and so it's gratifying to be able to help a lot of those people out.
So when should someone see a podiatrist like yourself?
Well, there's generally a couple different categories of patients. The first one of the more prominent ones, is the diabetic population. For many different reasons, diabetics have a lot of different issues with the feet, and the consequences can be very severe. And so it's very important that they have someone closely monitoring their feet on a regular basis. We also tend to see patients that have long-standing problems with their feet. They may have aches and pains that have been going on for months or for years, things like plantar fasciitis, tendinitis, bunions, or hammer toes. We also have patients that come in with more of an acute problem. They've got an ankle sprain, or they've got an ankle fracture, or they drop something on their foot, those sorts of issues. So it's a wide spectrum of patients that come in to see us.
Well, let's start with just basic foot pain. Do you often see a common cause in basic foot pain cases?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons why people can have foot pain. One of them would be structure of the foot. There are some people that have very low arches, and there are some people that have very high arches. And depending on which they have, we see that they have a change in the pressure profile on their foot. And that can lead to corns and calluses, that can lead to metatarsalgia, that can lead to stress fractures, that sort of thing. We also have, like I mentioned a few seconds ago, patients that come in with trauma. The long-standing kind of trauma with tendinitis or with plantar fasciitis, degeneration of the joints in the foot that leads to arthritis, or even the acute trauma with sprains or fractures. Oftentimes we see patients that come in with problems with their shoe gear as well. In school and in residency, we're taught what the good class of shoes is and what the bad class of shoes is. But there are certain patients that are outliers. They don't necessarily follow those guidelines. So the generic advice that I give patients is that if you have a pair of shoes that you feel are comfortable and don't cause too much discomfort, they're a good pair of shoes. One set or one classification of shoes that seems to cause a lot of problems is high heel shoes. I know a lot of women like to wear them. And if you're wearing them for long-term, or if you're wearing them long-term for long periods of time, the foot can start to accommodate, and we can see it can cause problems like metatarsalgia, capsulitis. It can exacerbate hammer toes, and if patients, again, are wearing them for long periods of time, they can even cause contracture of some of the muscles at the back of the ankle, which can lead to a lot of significant problems.
So I guess the lesson for high heels is okay in moderation.
Moderation.
Right? How about in the summer? We often wear a lot of sandals, that kind of thing. Is that bad for the feet too?
It can be. The reason that it can be is that sandals generally don't have any support around the heel, and so we see that patients are oftentimes grabbing at their shoes with their toes, and that can cause problems like hammer toes, capsulitis, other issues like that.
How about orthotics? What are orthotics?
Orthotics are devices that we prescribe for patients that can be over-the-counter or prescription that we use to correct any number of problems. One classification of an orthotic is the kind that we use to reinforce the arch, We help to realign joints, to control motion, to take tension off of ligaments and tendons. And the other kind, it would be more of an accommodative insert. It's the kind that we routinely give to diabetic patients. And the goal of it is to essentially bring the ground up to the foot to equalize any of the pressure that's on the foot and try to prevent any calluses and shearing forces, and wounds.
So this is something that slips inside the shoe then?
Exactly. The orthotics for the more athletic population are going to be able to move from shoe to shoe, mostly an athletic shoe. But the diabetic population, they tend to have to get the custom inserts as well as custom shoes.
Dr. Fleischman, let's talk again about some of the common foot problems that you see patients for, and just talk a little bit about each of those.
One of the more common reasons that we see patients in foot and ankle surgery is for bunion care. Now, bunions, most people think that those are simply overgrowths of bones. What it actually is shifting of the bones in the foot. And because of this, the most reasonable treatment for this would be surgical intervention. And you can have surgery where patients are allowed to walk on their feet that day. You can have a more aggressive surgery that patients need to be on crutches for about 6 weeks. And so you kind of have to look at the patient population and see what's most appropriate for them.
And this is a protrusion on one or other side of the foot? Is that what
Correct.
it is?
Actually, it can happen on both sides of the foot. On the inside of the foot with the first metatarsal, that's just a standard bunion where the big toe starts to drift out towards the lesser toes. On the other side of the foot, it's called a Taylor's bunion, and there's essentially 3 different reasons or 3 different categories why patients can develop these. But unless patients are willing to wear big, wide clown shoes, they essentially are going to need surgical intervention for that. Some of the other things that we see patients for on a regular basis would be painful hammer toes. And if, again, identifying patients and identifying what's best for them. Usually in the older population, we can get by with comfortable shoes and padding and some splinting. In the younger population, oftentimes we have to go in and do surgery for that.
So what exactly is a hammer toe?
Well, a hammer toe, a digital deformity, is when the toes are not laying straight. And there are multiple different classifications of hammer toes. And essentially what happens is there are extrinsic muscles that originate in the leg, and the tendons go down to the toes. They tend to be a little bit more powerful. And then you also have intrinsic muscles, multiple different categories of muscles in the foot. And their job is to help to stabilize the metatarsal phalangeal joint and to help to keep toes in relative good alignment. It happens a lot in patients with flat feet and in patients with high arched feet. Those muscles in the leg are asked to fire longer and harder than they're supposed to. And because they're much stronger than the muscles within the foot, they overpower them and they cause the toes to buckle.
So the toes actually are curling then?
They can curl.
And it's because your muscles are overcompensating?
It's usually just, for simplicity's sake, an imbalance in the muscle pull on both the top and the bottom of the foot. We also see patients on a regular basis for arthritis in the foot, and the most common reason for arthritis in the foot is pain about the big toe. We call that hallux limitus, where that joint gets very stiff and hard to move. Again, comfortable shoes would be the primary choice for that, but many of those patients often require surgery. We see soft tissue masses, we see tendinitis, plantar fasciitis, neuromas, many different things.
You know, another disease that podiatry plays a large role in patients' lives is diabetic patients, right? Talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Well, we see diabetics on a regular basis, and most of the time, unfortunately, it's the diabetics that are not very well controlled and are not taking care of themselves. And so it's very important to have someone monitoring very closely. With diabetes, with elevated blood sugars over prolonged periods of time, we see that the nerves for multiple different functions in the foot stop working as well as they should. And so patients can develop neuropathy, where they don't feel things as well. There was a famous doctor who called it the gift of pain. Unfortunately, diabetics don't have the gift of pain. If I were to have something in my shoe, or if we stepped on something, we'd feel it and we'd take steps to alleviate the situation. Diabetics often don't, and so they can develop small wounds on the bottom of the foot that just get worse and worse. In addition to not feeling things properly, the sensation to the muscles out to the toes becomes damaged, and so patients can develop digital deformities, which can cause increases in pressure throughout the foot. They also can develop neuropathy with the cells that keep the foot hydrated, and so diabetics oftentimes will get very dry skin that can crack and cause problems. In addition to that, we know that with diabetics, when their blood sugars are elevated over certain numbers for prolonged periods of time, they tend to have a very difficult time healing wounds as well as fighting off infections. And so we see that in certain unfortunate patients, it's a cascade of multiple small problems leading up to major issues.
So is it fairly common for diabetic patients to see their podiatrist on a regular basis for all the reasons that you talked about.
Absolutely. I would say that patients who are well controlled, their blood sugars are where they should be, they've got good sensation, they're not having any major issues, they should probably be seen about every 6 months or every year just to make sure that nothing pops up. The diabetic patients that come in with limited blood flow and limited sensation and calluses or blisters, those are the ones that need to be seen on a very regular basis.
You know, I've heard of diabetic foot ulcers. I know what a stomach ulcer is, but what is a diabetic foot ulcer?
Well, again, we talked about the cascade of things going wrong, the patient's not having good sensation, their skin not being hydrated, they having digital deformities and areas of increased pressure. Again, if I had a problem or if you had a problem and we developed a blister or a callus, we'd feel it and we'd take steps to alleviate the problem. But diabetics don't necessarily feel it, and with the increased pressure that's constantly put in specific areas, the tissue becomes damaged and eventually starts to break down. And at that point, the diabetics have lost their primary defense against infection, the skin. And bacteria can get into the deeper tissues, and we can develop a couple different things. One, they can develop infections, and oftentimes that responds pretty decently to oral antibiotics, but if it doesn't, they can be admitted for IV antibiotics. If the wound continues to get deeper and deeper into some of the more vital structures, then unfortunately a foot and ankle surgeon has a role of surgically debriding and sometimes amputating parts of the foot.
Because these type of foot ulcers, they can become life-threatening if something's not done, right?
Exactly. Again, a low-grade infection with a little bit of cellulitis can be treated with oral antibiotics or a trip to the hospital, but sometimes these wounds get deeper down into joints, into the tendons, into the bones, and they can get much worse very quickly.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about surgery, because that is a large role that you play as a podiatric foot and ankle surgeon. You're in the operating room helping patients not only with diabetic foot ulcers, but other conditions as well. Can you talk some more about that?
Sure, absolutely. Again, like we talked about before, one of the more common reasons that we see patients is for pain associated with a bunion. And it's not simply just shaving off a bump in most cases. It's actually having to figure out what the problem is, why it formed, and making slight adjustments to the bones, to the joints, to the tendons. Same thing with hammer toes. We also have patients that have painful soft tissue masses throughout the foot. They can have painful neuromas that sometimes respond well to injections, but sometimes need to be excised. We can have joint pain, and in those instances we do what's called arthroscopy, where we stick a camera inside a joint to evaluate it and stick another instrument in to essentially be our fingers inside to clean up any pathology and try to improve the patient's symptoms. That is a nice procedure in that we make two small incisions about a centimeter and a half long rather than a big, large incision. Patients tend to respond better to that. Their healing process tends to be less involved that way.
And I would assume that surgery on the feet can be very complex because the feet have a lot of bones in them, right?
They do. They have a large number of bones, some of them very large, some of them very small. And it's not simply going in there and cutting things. It's understanding the relationship, the biomechanics of the foot, which joint is supposed to be moving when, which tendon is supposed to be firing when. And so when you see a pathological condition, a high-arched foot or a low-arched foot or a bunion or a hammer toe, you can understand what's causing it and you can go in there and fix it.
Well, we're just about out of time. Can you give us just some last words of advice to keep our feet healthy?
Best piece of advice I can give you is to just keep a close eye on your feet, especially in the diabetic population. If there are problems, it's usually easier to treat things sooner rather than later. If you're not a diabetic but you do have aches and pains, again, keep a close eye on your feet. From my experience, it's easier to treat pain in a foot that's been there for a couple of days or weeks as opposed to a couple of months or years. So rather than delaying things, come in and see us and we'll hopefully help you out. Comfortable shoes are always good advice. Not going barefoot, I notice, especially when the weather starts to warm up, people like to go barefoot, but that can usually cause a lot of different problems. So comfortable shoes, keep a close eye on your feet, and if there's any questions or concerns, you let us know.
All right. Well, thanks to our guest today, Dr. Jeremy Fleischman, a podiatric foot and ankle surgeon from Mayo Clinic Health System. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And to make an appointment with Dr. Fleischman in Fairmont, you can call 507-238-8501. Thank you for joining us today on Speaking of Health. Have a great day and be healthy.
Hi, my name is Brian Peterson, and welcome to another special On the Road to Our Story. Today, we're sharing about Our Story Productions' longtime friend, Millicent Gapel. You know, it was Oscar Wilde, the famous British playwright, who once said, "Life has been your art. You have set yourself to music. Your days are your sonnets. Well, nothing could be truer said when it comes to the life of Millicent Goepel. Today, you will be watching a special episode talking about her life and the new book that she has written called The Art of Myths and Music. Millicent has played a concert at the Fairmont Opera House in Fairmont, Minnesota, and she has been on Our Story Goes Hollywood special that was shot a few years ago, and we're very pleased to bring you this interesting, perhaps a little unusual story about Our Story's wonderful friend, Millicent Goepel.
My passions have just come forward, and it's as if I've given myself permission to really have a good time.
After nearly 8 decades of helping others chase their dreams, Millicent Goepel is ready to take flight.
Now that I'm in my 70s, I have to ask myself, why not now? If I don't do it now, when will I do it? My husband is established, my children are established, my parents are gone. This is my time. I was sitting and talking with some friends, and they said, you've had such an interesting life. What would you like to do now? What haven't you done? And I thought about it for a moment, and I realized I hadn't just had fun. I hadn't done something just for the sheer pleasure of doing it. And at that moment, I gave myself permission to do something that was just for fun.
So, for the first time, Millicent is breathing pure, unadulterated fun into her life, blowing the dust off of 2 of her longtime loves, music and art.
It's really a culmination of everything I've done in my life. It's been quite fascinating.
Her most recent muse, mythology.
And when I was reading the book, The Goddess Within Every Woman, not only was I being bombarded with these wonderful images, but I recognized myself, I recognized my friends, I recognized people in the public arena. We see Aphrodite in Liz Taylor, in Angelina Jolie. Hera and Zeus, you know, the philandering husband and the jealous wife, the humiliated wife. We had the Clintons. We had Bill and Hillary Clinton doing that. When Nancy Reagan married Ronnie, she said, my life began the day I married Ronnie. Her purpose in life was to be a wife to the head man. It's very contemporary. We look at Cary Grant, George Clooney. This is a perfect Adonis, a man so beautiful that two goddesses, Aphrodite and Persephone, were fighting over him. I think that we need heroes and heroines in our lives. And the myths bring us the stories of these gods and goddesses, larger than life figures. We need that to lead our way.
Now she needed a way to turn her fascination with mythology into art. Soon, the answer became crystal clear.
So now I had the crystal decanter sitting on the counter, and I looked at it and I thought, what can I do? I cannot throw this out. You can't, it had a little narrow top. I can't put something back in it. What shall I do? I picked it up and I held it up to the light. And crystal and light are just an incredible marriage. And I thought, I'm going to smash it. I have to tell you, the first time I took the hammer to it really hurt me. I thought, I'm smashing this gorgeous thing. The crystal shattered so gorgeously. And I said, this is what I need for my glass. And that really was the beginning. My first one that I did was Artemis. And I wondered why. And it occurred to me that I was starting on a new project, and she is a very goal-oriented goddess. If she sees something, she takes aim and she shoots her silver-tipped arrow at it until it finds its mark. And I think I felt that I was taking aim at this big project that I was starting, and that nothing was going to get in my way or stop it. Here we come to Aphrodite. Probably the most famous of the goddesses. She is representative of great beauty. Aphrodite, though, is really creation and procreation. We always think of her as a sensual goddess, but she she had part of her creation was every sense that we have. And in a way that relates to what I've done with my field of psychoneuroimmunology. She represents smell and taste and beauty and sound and every beautiful thing that you could see. She was probably a Phoenician goddess. And you can see she bursts out of the ocean. She has come from the sea. And of course, we all have lived in water the first 9 months of our life. We have a golden girdle, which was representative of her great sensuality. But the golden girdle serves two purposes. It separates the procreation from the creation. And we have a comb for her hair because from the head comes thought. An idea. The mirror, of course, because she was so beautiful, she always looked in the mirror. This is Hestia, goddess of the hearth. The hearth is the most important thing in a Greek home. And as Vesta, goddess of the Vestal Virgins, it would be the most important thing in the temple. Hestia is the most intuitive and the most inward-centered of the goddesses. And if you will look, you will see I have done her in a mandala shape. She is very, very controlled. She is the least active of the gods. She doesn't take place in any of the processions. She stays at her hearth. Aphrodite wanted to have the experience of men in her life. So she had both Poseidon, god of the ocean, and Apollo, the sun god, fall in love with her. But she didn't have any one of them. She wanted to be by herself. She is very complete in herself, which is what the mandala represents. Her color is lavender. We have done a lot of lavender around her because lavender is the color of spirituality.
Millicent's personal connection to her work is clear. Each piece inspired by love, each one different than the other. At the same time, she's careful not to take them too seriously. Remember, from here on out, she only takes pride in the work if she has fun in the process.
And I thought, there is something kind of fun, first of all, about smashing it. That gets rid of all of your aggression. It is really fun to hit this. That there is an element of danger in producing this beautiful shattered glasswork that I do, and that I, as a pianist who am very careful about my fingers and my hands, am literally dipping my fingers into shattered glass.
1,000 broken pieces of glass, turning her wildest fantasies into reality. Still, Millicent felt there was one big piece missing.
And then I was at the piano one day, and I was sitting. The artwork on the wall behind my pianos is Artemis. And I was playing Liszt's Forest Murmurs. And I suddenly turned around and I looked at Artemis and I said, Artemis, I'm playing your song. And then I realized when I had been doing Selene, the moon goddess, I kept hearing Clair de Lune, Debussy's Clair de Lune. I thought, isn't this remarkable? And then I decided I had to marry the two, because that's the way I worked. I saw the colors when I was at the piano, and I heard the music when I was working with the art. It was a natural progression, the two of them together. If you look at the picture of Artemis, she's done in all the greens and the blues, all these forest colors and watercolors. When I was playing Forest Murmurs, those were the colors I saw in my head.
Millicent's entire life had revolved around music, and it too belonged in her new venture. So she called upon every melodic bone in her body for inspiration.
Music, of course, is my first language. I started music when I was 4 years old, and I spent many years on the stage doing concerts. My passion for music carries over to my travels. On these trips, I've had the unique experience of playing many famous pianos. For example, I've played Liszt's pianos in his home in Budapest, Hungary, and also at the La Scala Opera Museum in Milan, Italy. Grieg's piano in his home in Bergen, Norway, Rossini's piano in Pesaro, Italy, and even the piano in the hall where Mozart played the opening concert. I can't describe the thrill it is to be playing the composer's music on the instrument where perhaps he wrote it. I was the most fortunate of children. I had a magical childhood. My father was a professional musician on Broadway, And every Saturday, my brother would take me down to the theater, and I would sit with the musicians in the pit because I was too young to sit by myself in the audience. And then I would play backstage, and then we would go out to dinner with all the professional performers. I was indeed a Broadway baby. When my children were very young, I gave piano lessons. I was the neighborhood piano teacher. And while that's very interesting, it certainly is not to the level of performance that I was used to. And then when the children were in school, there was no music teacher, and that appalled me. So I stepped into the school and started a music program. That evolved into my own children's opera theater, because as the children left the elementary school, the parents came to me and said, we must have more of this. It's an interesting thing because when I am doing this artwork, in my mind it's as if I'm doing a stage set, and I am setting the scene for my gods and goddesses to perform.
And Millicent knows a thing or two about setting a scene. As an accomplished concert pianist, she's built a reputation as a masterful storyteller on stage.
I love bringing that to children. I love bringing that to adults. When people come to my concerts, I give them a window into the music that perhaps they hadn't had before. How could you not enjoy enticing them? As a performer, when you get on the stage, you prepare a piece of music and you just don't know how it's going to be. You prepare and you work very, very hard, and then you get out there. If you have a good audience, you play better than you ever dreamed you could play. The audience breathes with you. And I don't even know how to explain that, except you pick up the excitement, and then you and the audience are having a musical dialogue.
Recently, Millicent took those conversations to another level, sharing her gifts and passions with a very different audience.
I've always been a storyteller. I've always loved stories. So I thought, all right, I will do a coffee table book with my beautiful images and I'll tell the story. And then I thought, well, you know, I always hear music when I'm working. I always hear the music in my mind. Why don't I also put in a compact disc of music that will enhance the pictures? So here we have the art of myths and music. Every author wants to feel that anybody could read the book, because you really want to sell books, don't you? But this, I truly feel anybody can read the book. We know that people who are interested in stories want to read the book. We know that people will be interested in looking at the pictures and hearing the music. But do you realize that a child could read the book and there is a treasure hunt in it? Because I talk about all of these icons and images that I put in the pictures. So a child can really go on a treasure hunt and see, where is that image? She's talking about the stag's head. She's talking about the heart. Why does the heart represent Aphrodite? For her beauty and her love. Everybody loves a good story, and it's really fun to look in the pictures to find the images.
But if you take the time to read between the lines, you'll find the book's true treasure. The story of a woman in her 70s who's become a goddess in her own right, a finally freed spirit who soars with a new lease on life and a smile on her face.
It's awful to be put in the position of giving advice, the guru on the hill, and I would never presume to give anybody advice. All I can tell you is that I allowed myself to do what my soul wanted. I had to do this artwork. I was bursting with ideas. I was bursting with images. And I think that indeed puts me in a very fortunate position, because how many people can get to do what they want to do more than anything else in the world? I gave myself permission in my 70s to do something just for the sheer pleasure of it. I said to the critic, "Be gone. This is just for fun. This doesn't count. I don't care if anybody looks at it or doesn't look at it. This is just for me." And it was the most freeing moment. It could happen at any time. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is life. You're not going to get another chance to do this. The question that you asked in the very beginning, if not now, when? This is my now.